Hello, River Oaks Church family. David Kamara here. Greetings in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ. It's good to be able to talk with you today and to encourage you to pray in these very challenging and confusing days. I'd like to call us all to prayer. Specifically, I'd like us to pray for truth to govern our lives. I'd like us to pray for peace to govern our neighborhoods, for love to govern our hearts, for wisdom to govern our tongues, and for God's providence to govern our going out and our coming in. We need help in these days to navigate these troubled waters as God's people journeying home. So I would encourage you also to meditate on Romans chapter 8, that great chapter that we've just finished preaching through. And if you missed some of those sermons, I'd encourage you to go back and listen to them. Just meditate prayerfully on the great truths of that chapter in order to encourage and strengthen you and to guard your heart and mind in Christ Jesus in these days. As a group of elders, I just wanted to reaffirm that we are meeting again this week, prayerfully attempting to apply all the relevant biblical principles to our situation and to our threefold plan, three-stage reopening of our church. We're doing the best that we can. We'd ask that you would pray for us for wisdom, because these are uncharted waters, and we don't always have all the relevant information that we need or would like, and so we are doing our best. We are also, we have a committee meeting on this, as well as we are in conversation with other PCA churches in our area, seeking their wisdom on how they are working through this COVID crisis as a church and how they are reopening their services and ministries as well. I was reading Romans 12 today. I'd just like to encourage you with these words. Let love be genuine. Abhor what is evil. Hold fast to what is good. Love one another with brotherly affection. Outdo one another in showing honor. Do not be slothful in zeal. Be fervent in spirit. Serve the Lord. Rejoice in hope. Be patient in tribulation. Be constant in prayer. Contribute to the needs of the saints. And seek to show hospitality. So let's seek to put these exhortations into practice as best we can, even at a distance, to love one another well and to be kind to one another, to treat one another with dignity and respect, even our neighbors. Jesus said that by our unity and love for one another, all men would know that we are his disciples. So let's hold together, let's stick together, and let's hold out the hope of the gospel in word and deed to those around us, those we come in contact with. Let's be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to become angry, and even slower to make judgments about one another. What I mean is this: let's not make judgments about one another's spiritual maturity, Christian commitment, or political leanings based on how each person responds to this COVID crisis. We all need God's grace and guidance in these days, and we're not going to agree with everything everyone does, and that shouldn't be the case. In fact, the church is not about uniformity of thought. We are about unity of heart, mind, and purpose around the Lord Jesus Christ. And so let's show grace and kindness to one another, giving the benefit of the doubt to one another as well. Greg is going to follow up with some details on our phase 2 reopening process. And we hope to see you face to face very soon. God's richest blessings on you and on your family. Peace.
Greetings, River Oaks. Greg Lanier here, your associate pastor. And as David mentioned, on behalf of the COVID Reopening Committee, I would like to give you an overview of stage 2 of our reopening plan. I'll give some of the highlights, big picture highlights, particularly how this will differ from stage 1. And then I'll cover a few of the main points as to some of the thought process behind a few of the details. So let's dig into the plan.
A copy of the presentation will be available on the website, and so if you want to see the details or if you have trouble seeing them on the screen, feel free to take a look at that, but let's walk through it. It's worth reminding ourselves of what our goal was all the way back when we started the reopening planning process to begin with. And it's simply this: to develop and implement a staged approach to relaunching in-person ministries at River Oaks Church, which balances health considerations with the desire for normal, in our new normal, worship and fellowship. Here is an overview of the three-stage plan. You'll notice on the left, I won't review it, but that was where we landed with stage 1B, which was a slight tweak on the original stage 1. After a few weeks, if you recall, we increased our maximum attendance and also invited children of a certain age to attend. And so you can see that on the left, and on the far right, you'll see stage 3. I'm not going to go through that because much of that is still very much TBD, but you can see at least some of our hypotheses there. None of that has changed since the last presentation. Let's focus our attention on stage 2, and I'll run through the details, and then there'll be a few key parts that we'll drill into here for a few minutes. In terms of service format, one of the biggest changes relative to stage 1 will be the fact that we'll go back to having 2 services. We'll have a 9 o'clock service and an 11 o'clock service, and so excited about that. With each of them, we will still maintain, however, the 60-person max with the social distancing and with the space constraints that we covered in our original plan. That is still the wisest course of action. We did increase it, if you recall, from 50 to 60, and so that seems to be going well. Because of that, you'll still need to make an online reservation, and whenever you get that email during the week, you'll need to pick a service to attend. You'll either RSVP for the 9 o'clock or the 11, and we do ask that you do your best to attend the one that you RSVP for. For those who are continuing to worship with us at home, we will continue offering a stream service. The stream service will continue being at 11. We will not live stream the 9 a.m., but it'll still be at 11. And then in the hour or so between the 2 services until we relaunch Adult Sunday School, which hopefully will happen at some point down the road, perhaps at a latter part of this stage, we will do some sort of light sanitation and so forth between services of the seats and the hard services and whatnot. In terms of attendees, and of course, this is par for the course for pretty much any institution or store. If you're a high-risk individual with multiple comorbidities and other underlying issues, or if you're someone who obviously is either symptomatic of COVID or has been diagnosed with it recently, or someone who has traveled to a hotspot area, we continue to ask you to worship with us from home. One of the big changes for this stage, however, is that we are not only including children ages 4 through 17, but also opening things up to low risk, otherwise healthy adults that are over the age of 65. And I'll come back to that here in a minute. In terms of personal practices, we'll continue to maintain as best as possible the 6-foot spacing. But in contrast to stage 1, where we had sort of seating pods of 1, 2, or 3 or 4 seats, if you noticed on this past Sunday, we are doing rows with a large gap in between them. And so that's how we'll manage that. We are going to continue, and I'll get into this here in a minute. We are going to continue asking everyone who attends to wear a mask. And again, I'll come back to some of the rationale for that and some of the details there. Given that our foyer is still obviously small, we don't have a gathering space, we do encourage you to congregate outdoors as opposed to in the building to again maintain the goal of social distancing. In terms of entering and exiting, no big change here. You'll still enter and exit through the front door. Our welcome team will offer you hand sanitizer on your way in. Volunteers will continue to have a temperature check, and then ushers will help seat and dismiss you. In terms of liturgical elements, only one major change here. We'll continue to have the bulletin or the liturgical elements on the screen. The offertory basket will remain available in the foyer. And the big change, as I mentioned, is that we do hope in a few weeks to relaunch the Lord's Supper. And so I'll come to that in a minute. And then finally, in terms of other things, at least for now in stage 2, we don't anticipate reopening our nursery or children's ministry. We'll kind of take that week to week or so. We do ask you, to the extent that there's any sort of overlap or something like that, to wait outside before you come into the second service if there's any kind of crowding, and then we will not be offering coffee or refreshments. I thought it'd be helpful to provide a little bit of broader context before I get into some of the finer details on a few of these bigger issues. As David mentioned, we've been in communication with other different churches within and outside of our denomination, and just as a point of context, not because we're comparing ourselves to others or saying that we have a better plan or what have you, or that we're trying to keep up with the Joneses, but actually just simply to give you a feel for how different churches are navigating this, and to show you that really there is no one size fits all, and everyone's trying to make a wise decision for their specific church. It's helpful to see how 8 other churches are doing their reopening along some of the major metrics. I won't go through it line by line, but these are some churches in the Central Florida area that are kind of in our peer group, so to speak. Some opened in May, just like we did. Others opened in June, and some haven't actually reopened yet. They're still only doing virtual services. And so it's a broad spectrum there. Depending on space constraints, and that's a big driver of this, some, like us, are having to do some sort of attendance cap with or without pre-registration. Others, because they have a bigger facility and can manage the social distancing, they aren't doing any sort of attendance cap. People, in terms of masks, are kind of in different places as well. Some are now making them optional. Others are kind of holding the line and saying, no, it's wisest to keep doing it. And then there's even a little bit of diversity when it comes to nursery stuff. Some have reopened their nursery, others haven't, and so on. So that just helps you get a feel for where other churches are and how we're kind of really just in the middle of the pack, which is hopefully a good place to be. A couple of the details to work through. In terms of attendees, as I mentioned, the big change is in a sense, sort of opening things up to adults over 65. They are, and if you're in that demographic, of course, you're still considered high risk by the medical community. But of course, that's going to vary based on your own underlying health. And so at this stage in the game, we feel like we want to support your liberty of conscience and joining for in-person worship if you feel like it's prudent for you to take that personal risk. And if you're otherwise healthy, and of course, many of you will continue to stay at home because of loved ones, because of your own health concerns for your own self. And so that's fine too. There's no pressure. Just because you can doesn't mean you have to. There's no sort of ranking system in terms of who comes and who doesn't. But we do want to at least invite those who are over 65 to consider whether and when is the right time for them to return to in-person services. But we want to make you aware that there is still a lot of debate about asymptomatic transmission, particularly among children. The school systems are still working through that. And so we do encourage families who do have young children to attend the second service. We're not going to require that, of course, but generally speaking, most of our families do choose to do that. And so if that's the case, and if you're in if you're in the 65 and over demographic, you might want to consider going to the first service. And of course, we're not going to require you to, but just be aware that is what it will be like in terms of the two different services. In terms of social distancing, we'll continue pursuing that goal, and therefore we'll have to limit attendance. You'll get, as I mentioned, the email to RSVP for the service ahead of time. As mentioned, the rows will be spaced 6 feet apart. And then one sort of important wrinkle is that our ushers will try to do their best to make sure there's at least 2 seats between each group of related people. And we'll try to navigate that so that the horizontal spacing is still at the kind of level that we want it to be as well. In terms of the Lord's Supper, we do tentatively plan to celebrate the Lord's Supper in July, and we're looking forward to that. As Presbyterians, and as most Presbyterians, we haven't obviously been doing online communion. We have a lot of theological and sacramental convictions about that. And so that's why we have been avoiding that, because we believe you only do it when the actual corporate body is gathered. But we also haven't been doing it in the sort of stage one, because there's been so few who have been attending, and because so many sort of structurally weren't able to attend. As we move down the road into stage two, we hope that as sort of barriers to come start relaxing, and as more people are able to come, we do look forward to the opportunity to re-engage the Lord's Supper. And when we do so, the servers, elders, and deacons will be masked. They'll have gloves, and they'll distribute prepackaged elements, both the bread and the cup, to the congregates by walking down each row, as opposed to passing a plate or having folks sort of stand up and circulate through the room. And this will help minimize cross-contamination. Last big issue is masks. And so let me take a couple minutes to speak to this. If you've been paying attention to the news or having conversations with folks, sadly, because it's 2020 and it's been a crazy year, the wearing or non-wearing of face masks, unfortunately, has become a bit of a symbolic and even divisive action, or almost sort of this a statement for many, or a non-statement. And The data about the efficacy of masks has evolved, and that's hard to navigate. But our medical advisors to our reopening task force strongly, in fact, very emphatically recommend that we continue to use them, especially River Oaks continue to use them because we have tremendous space constraints that sort of make we don't have a big cavernous auditorium, but we have a very small worship space because we do sing and we want to sing. And that's the highest risk part of our worship service. And because you're spending over an hour in an enclosed space. And this is an important point to underscore. Coming to a worship service for over an hour in a space that is as small as ours is very, very different than going to Home Depot. It's very different than going to Best Buy or Publix. And as you know, many of those places are kind of all over the map right now in terms of whether you have to wear a mask or not. When you go to those kinds of establishments, it's much shorter, bigger spaces. You're not singing. Often you're not talking to anyone. It's just a very different situation. A worship service is, in many respects, a very high risk kind of environment for the spread of the virus if someone has it, because of the nature of the facility and the nature of what we're doing. And so we are going to continue asking you to wear a mask in the worship service. We've done a lot of thinking and praying about this, and we know that many of you either find masks uncomfortable or find them to be something that you don't want to do on principle. So let's kind of just go to the core principles that underlie why we might, at least for now, pursue this course of action. And we're not mandating or asking you to wear a mask out of some sort of reaction to current events or to whatever the latest news conferences are, or the latest thought piece on blogs or what have you. It fundamentally derives from two different things. One, our River Oaks core values, that we desire to be a vibrant expression of the kingdom of God. So while we're getting back together again, we've been wanting to do this, and we're actually fairly early relative to other churches in reopening. We want to bless our city. We want to spread the gospel, and we want to especially sacrificially love our neighbors. None of that has changed. And so it's a small price to pay, even if you are uncomfortable and even if you have your preferences in a different direction. It's a small price to pay when you come to worship to sort of lay those down and seek after the core values of River Oaks as a church, which haven't changed with the news cycle. Another very important factor to consider, and this is what our own sort of individual medical advisors have pointed out, is that since Memorial Day, we have seen a very discernible uptick in cases, and it doesn't appear to just be related to increased testing. Testing has largely been fairly status quo, but we've seen an uptick in Seminole County of diagnoses, and we want to take that seriously. We're not shutting down, but we are saying, okay, in light of the data, it seems to be wise to continue a cautious course of action as opposed to a more aggressive course of action. Again, this isn't driven by stats in New York or Fort Lauderdale. This is based on our local area where we have seen an increase. In fact, if you look at the broader curve, it's starting to look much like the curve in April. So we just want to be careful and not be rash in the decision that we make. So it's important to point out that even though a lot of the news cycle has moved on in different directions, we really are still in a pandemic. And wearing a mask, of course, according to the best medical advice that we can find, remains the best way not only to protect yourself, but this is very important, also to protect others. In other words, even if you don't want to wear, even if you're anti-mask, by wearing a mask, you make it possible for other people to attend River Oaks without subjecting them to necessary risk and without sort of forcing them to agree with you on masks. If someone is very concerned and feels like masks are really essential in this time period, sort of refusing to wear one on some sort of principled issue means that really you're putting that person in a position where they can't worship. It's much if you're convicted about masks and want to wear a mask and feel like you need to wear a mask, then that's one thing. And if you feel like, well, I don't care about masks, it's much easier for you to wear the mask than it is for someone who feels like they need to, and you're basically forcing them essentially to not come. So in light of Romans 14 and 1 Corinthians 8 and 10, in a worship context especially, we are called to voluntarily suspend your preferences out of deference to others. For those who find masks uncomfortable, I totally hear you. I don't like them either. It's hot and so forth. You get stank breath after a while. But keep in mind that worship is not meant to be comfortable. Never has been. It's a luxury, actually, that we have air conditioning and it is generally comfortable. You go to other parts of the world and it is definitely not a comfortable thing. So just remember that in terms of your own posture towards the mask issue. We're thinking through the wisest course of action for our church and our circumstances and our particular people. That said, if we're going to monitor this very closely, our task force and our leadership will revisit the data. And if things do seem to sort of level off in terms of Central Florida and Seminole County, then we will absolutely and hope to be able to kind of relax the masking component of this plan. So in the meantime, I would exhort you, let us strive not to make masks a gospel issue. Let's do our best to act with sincere charity and love towards others, even acknowledging differences of opinion. It is far better to err on the side of caution and have a clean conscience about that than to engage in judging one another and sort of pulling your own personal privilege to the table. Let us seek to love one another in light of this. And so, because of all the complex factors, and we acknowledge there are many, we are, at least for now, as part of this first bit of stage 2, we are going to continue asking you to meet us on this one in terms of wearing a mask. So that's the plan. Thank you for your understanding and your patience. That's it for now.
Well, if you made it to this point, thank you for your attention. Hopefully this has been a helpful way to give you an overview of the important details of our Stage 2 plan, as well as some of the thought that went into it. Look forward to seeing many more of you as we gather for our worship services. And as always, let me just reiterate that if you have any questions or comments or concerns, please don't hesitate to email or reach out to David or me, and we'll be happy to walk through any concerns you may have. Thank you for your patience, and look forward to seeing you all very soon.